He accused her of cheating and slammed the door shut. 2 years later, one little blue-eyed girl forced him to face the truth he never bothered to ask for. The accusation came out of Michael's mouth louder than he intended, sharp enough to slice through the quiet of the apartment like glass. His voice echoed off the high ceilings, filling the space with anger that had been building for days, fed by suspicion and his own restless imagination. He stood rigid near the window, blonde hair slightly disheveled, blue eyes cold and unyielding, already convinced of his own version of the truth. "You're cheating on me," he said again, slower this time, as if repeating it would make it more real. Emily froze near the kitchen counter. She had dark hair pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping as if even they were tired of being controlled. Her blue eyes lifted to him, wide not with guilt, but with shock. In her hand was her phone, the same phone Michael had grabbed minutes earlier, scrolling through a single message without asking who sent it or why. "I can explain," she said softly, her voice steady despite the way her fingers trembled slightly. Michael let out a bitter laugh. "Explain what? I've seen enough." He turned the phone toward her, as if it were proof of a crime rather than a fragment of a conversation ripped from context. To him, explanations were excuses, and doubt felt like weakness. Years of power and authority had taught him that acting first and listening later was the fastest way to stay in control. Emily stared at him for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy and painful. In that pause, something inside her shifted, something fragile finally giving way under the weight of repeated dismissals she had tried not to notice before. She realized, with sudden clarity, that this wasn't about a message or even about jealousy. It was about how little he trusted her, how easily he chose anger over understanding. "No, Michael," she said quietly. "You haven't seen anything." He scoffed, turning away as if the conversation were already finished. "I don't need lies." Emily felt the sting of that word deeper than any raised voice. She had imagined many versions of how things might fall apart between them, but none where she would be judged so quickly, so completely, by the person who claimed to love her. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, and in that moment made a decision she hadn't known she was capable of making. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to convince him. Instead, she set the phone down gently on the counter, the small sound it made strangely final. She looked at Michael one last time, searching his face for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that he might stop and ask a single question. There was none. "You'll regret walking away," he said, his tone more irritated than hurt. Emily met his gaze calmly. "No," she replied. "I'll regret staying." She picked up her bag and walked past him, her footsteps quiet but firm. Michael didn't follow. He didn't call after her. He was too certain that she would come back once she had time to cool down, too confident that his world would continue exactly as it always had. The door closed softly behind her, the sound barely audible, yet it marked an ending far more profound than either of them fully understood. As Emily stepped into the hallway, her heart pounded, fear and relief colliding inside her chest. She didn't know yet that she was carrying a secret that would change everything. She didn't know how lonely the next 2 years would be, or how strong she would have to become. All she knew was that she had walked away without defending herself, and that one day, Michael Howard would finally understand how wrong he had been, long after it was too late to undo the damage of that single, careless accusation. Emily didn't look back as she walked down the stairs and out into the night. The city felt louder than usual, every sound too sharp, every light too bright, but she welcomed the distraction. It kept her from breaking down before she was ready. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hugging her coat closer, forcing herself to breathe evenly while the weight of what had just happened settled into her chest. She had nowhere specific to go, only a clear understanding of where she would not return. That night she stayed with a friend, answering gentle questions with vague replies and exhausted smiles. Everyone assumed it was just another fight, the kind powerful men had and quickly forgot. Emily let them believe it, because explaining the truth felt harder than carrying it alone. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by flashes of Michael's voice, his certainty, the way he had dismissed her explanation without hearing a single word. By morning, something inside her had hardened. Michael called once. Then twice. His messages were short and irritated, asking where she was, telling her to come back so they could talk like adults. There was no apology, no doubt, no question mark. Emily read them in silence and did not respond. She understood now that any conversation would be shaped by his need to be right, not by the truth. 2 weeks later, the nausea started. At first she blamed stress, the sudden change in routine, the emotional exhaustion she carried everywhere. But when the dizziness didn't fade and mornings became unbearable, she bought a test on her way home from work, telling herself not to expect anything. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the result long after it appeared, her heart pounding so hard it made her lightheaded. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind, frightening and unreal. She pressed a hand to her stomach, not feeling anything yet, but suddenly aware that her body was no longer hers alone. Fear came first, sharp and overwhelming, followed by a wave of disbelief so strong she laughed quietly through tears. Michael was the first person she thought of. For a brief, dangerous moment, she imagined calling him, imagined hearing his voice soften, imagined him apologizing, imagined everything becoming simpler because he would take control the way he always did. The image dissolved as quickly as it formed. She remembered the accusation, the refusal to listen, the way he had already decided who she was without asking. She put the phone down. The doctor's appointment confirmed it with calm efficiency. Emily sat in the sterile room, nodding while the doctor explained timelines and next steps, her mind struggling to keep up. When she stepped back outside, the city looked different, as if the future had shifted slightly to the left of where she had expected it to be. She moved. Not dramatically, not overnight, but deliberately. A smaller apartment in another part of the city, then another job that didn't come with Michael's shadow attached to it. She packed quietly, leaving behind only what no longer felt like hers. Each step felt both terrifying and necessary. Michael didn't know. He assumed her silence was temporary, that she would eventually return when reality became inconvenient. Emily never corrected him. She focused instead on building something stable enough to stand without him. As weeks passed, fear gave way to determination. She learned how to plan alone, how to budget, how to sit with uncertainty without collapsing under it. Some nights she cried quietly into her pillow, grieving the life she thought she had, the future she had imagined. Other nights she lay awake, listening to her heartbeat, wondering who this child would be and what kind of mother she would have to become. By the time her stomach began to round, Emily had stopped expecting rescue. She had made a choice the night she walked out without defending herself, and every day after that choice demanded strength she didn't know she possessed. But with each passing week, she felt it growing, steady and unyielding, anchored by the quiet knowledge that whatever lay ahead, she would face it on her own terms. Michael Howard would continue living his life, convinced he had been betrayed. Emily would carry the truth alone, knowing that one day, far in the future, he would finally understand what his certainty had cost him. The months that followed reshaped Emily's life in ways she could never have prepared for, stripping everything down to what was essential and forcing her to grow stronger before she felt ready. Pregnancy changed her body quickly, leaving her exhausted and nauseous, but it was the emotional weight that pressed hardest. Every doctor's visit reminded her that she was doing this alone, every form she filled out without a second name beside hers felt like a quiet confirmation of the path she had chosen. She worked as long as she could, pushing through long days with careful smiles and loose clothing that hid the growing curve of her stomach. At night, she lay awake in her small apartment, one hand resting protectively over her belly, listening to the city outside and wondering what kind of world her child would enter. Fear visited often, especially in the quiet moments, whispering doubts about money, about exhaustion, about whether love would be enough when there was no one to share the burden. Still, she didn't call Michael. Every time his name crossed her mind, it was followed by the memory of his voice raised in accusation, of his certainty that had left no space for truth. She knew that telling him now would mean opening herself to explanations, arguments, and apologies that might come too late or not honestly at all. More than that, it would mean risking her child's future on a man who had already proven how quickly he judged without listening. When the day came, it came suddenly. Emily barely made it to the hospital before the contractions became unbearable. The hours blurred together in a haze of pain, fear, and sharp fluorescent light. She clutched the bed rails, cried out when the pain overtook her, and begged silently for strength when she felt she had none left to give. There was no hand to hold, no familiar voice telling her she would be okay, only the steady guidance of nurses and her own stubborn refusal to give up. When it was over, the room filled with a sound that changed everything. A cry, small but fierce. Emily lay trembling as the nurse placed a tiny, warm body against her chest. The baby's eyes were open, impossibly bright and blue, her fine blonde hair damp against her forehead. Emily broke down then, tears streaming freely as she whispered apologies and promises into her daughter's skin, overwhelmed by love so sudden and intense it stole her breath. She named her Lily. The days after were some of the hardest Emily had ever known. Sleep came in minutes rather than hours. Her body ached constantly, her emotions shifting without warning. There were moments she stared at Lily in quiet disbelief, terrified by the enormity of responsibility resting in her arms. And yet, there was also peace in the simplicity of it, in the way Lily calmed when Emily held her close, in the way her tiny fingers wrapped instinctively around Emily's own. Life narrowed to feedings, diapers, and soft lullabies hummed in the dark. Money was tight. Emily returned to work earlier than she should have, juggling childcare with long hours and quiet exhaustion. Some days she cried in the bathroom at work, wiping her face before anyone could notice. Other days she felt invincible, buoyed by Lily's smile and the quiet pride of knowing she was doing this on her own. People asked about the father. Emily answered with practiced calm, never offering details, never inviting questions. She learned to live with the looks of curiosity and judgment, to accept help without explanations, to stand firm in choices that others didn't understand. As Lily grew, her resemblance became impossible to ignore. The same bright blue eyes. The same intense stare when she focused on something. Strangers commented on it casually, unaware of how deeply it struck Emily each time. She never corrected them. She never spoke Michael's name aloud. 2 years passed slowly and then all at once. Lily learned to walk, to talk, to laugh with unrestrained joy. She called Emily her whole world without realizing it, and Emily built her life around that truth. The fear never fully disappeared, but it softened, replaced by a quiet confidence earned through countless small victories. Emily believed she had closed that chapter forever. She believed Michael Howard was part of a past that no longer had the power to reach her. She did not know that fate had been waiting patiently, preparing to place him directly in her path when she least expected it, armed with nothing but regret and the unmistakable reflection of himself in the eyes of a child he had never known. The meeting happened on an ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it more devastating. Emily had taken Lily to a small park near their apartment, the kind with faded swings and a sandbox that never seemed completely clean. It was a place she liked because it felt anonymous, free from the polished world she had once shared with Michael. Lily toddled ahead of her, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, laughing as she tried to keep her balance on uneven ground. Emily watched her with a familiar mix of love and vigilance, scanning the park automatically, a habit she had developed over the past 2 years. That was when she saw him. Michael stood near the edge of the park, phone in hand, clearly distracted, his blonde hair catching the light in a way that instantly pulled a memory from somewhere deep and unwelcome. He looked thinner, sharper, dressed in the kind of tailored clothes that still belonged to his old life. At first, Emily hoped it was just someone who looked like him, but the hope vanished the moment he looked up. Their eyes met. Michael's expression shifted slowly, confusion turning into shock, then something like disbelief. He stared at Emily as if she were a ghost, a version of his past that was not supposed to exist anymore. Emily felt her breath catch, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. Every instinct told her to turn away, to leave, to protect Lily from a confrontation she had never prepared her for. But it was too late. Michael's gaze moved from Emily to Lily, who had stopped a few steps away, now struggling with her rabbit. His face drained of color as he took in the details he could not explain away. The bright blue eyes. The soft blonde hair. The unmistakable familiarity that mirrored his own reflection too perfectly to ignore. He took a step forward without realizing it. Emily's hand tightened around Lily's jacket. "Lily, come here," she said softly, forcing calm into her voice. Lily obeyed immediately, pressing against Emily's leg and peeking out with open curiosity. "Mom, who's that man?" she asked, her voice clear and innocent. Michael swallowed hard. He looked at Emily again, his voice unsteady. "Emily, how old is she?" Emily closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them, meeting his gaze without flinching. "2," she said. The word landed heavily between them. Michael shook his head slowly, as if refusing to understand. "That's not possible," he whispered, though every part of him already knew it was. "She's very possible," Emily replied quietly. Silence stretched between them, filled only by distant laughter from other children and the creak of swings moving in the wind. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he lowered his phone. "Is she?" he began, then stopped, afraid of the answer. Emily looked down at Lily, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her daughter's face. "Yes," she said finally. "She's yours." The words shattered whatever control Michael had left. He staggered back a step, running a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "You didn't tell me," he said hoarsely. "You didn't listen," Emily answered. "You didn't ask. You decided." Michael's eyes filled with something dangerously close to tears, though he clearly didn't know how to let them fall. "I was wrong," he said. "I know that now." Emily's voice hardened, not with anger, but with exhaustion. Knowing it now doesn't change what she needed then. Lily looked between them, sensing the tension without understanding it. She tugged at Emily's sleeve. "Mom, I'm hungry." Emily nodded immediately. "We're going home." She turned to leave, guiding Lily gently away, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. Michael followed a step behind, panic creeping into his voice. "Please, Emily. Just let me talk to you." She stopped and faced him one last time. "Not here," she said. "Not in front of her." Michael hesitated, then nodded. "When?" Emily considered him carefully, weighing the risk of reopening a wound she had spent years learning to live with. Finally, she reached into her bag, pulled out a small piece of paper, and wrote an address and time. 1 hour, she said. Tomorrow. Somewhere public. Michael took the paper as if it were fragile. Thank you, he whispered. Emily didn't respond. She lifted Lily into her arms and walked away, not looking back this time. Michael stood frozen at the edge of the park, watching them disappear, the realization settling heavily into his chest that the accusation he had thrown so carelessly 2 years ago had cost him more than a relationship. It had cost him a daughter. Emily chose the cafe with the same careful logic she now applied to everything in her life. It was bright, busy, and ordinary, filled with parents, laptops, and the constant background noise of conversations that made private emotions feel contained. She arrived early with Lily, ordering warm milk for her and tea for herself, sitting at a small corner table where she could see the door without feeling exposed. Lily sat on her knees, coloring seriously, her tongue caught between her lips in concentration. Emily watched her for a moment, grounding herself in the familiar rhythm of motherhood before allowing her thoughts to drift back to what was coming. Her chest felt tight, not with anger, but with a heavy, restrained fear she refused to name. Michael arrived exactly on time. He stopped just inside the doorway, scanning the room until he found them. When his eyes landed on Lily, his steps slowed, as if his body instinctively understood that this was not a moment to rush. Emily noticed how different he looked now, the confidence still there but dulled around the edges by something closer to humility. It unsettled her more than arrogance ever had. "Hi," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Sit," Emily replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. Her voice was calm, practiced, giving nothing away. Michael sat slowly, his hands clasped together as his gaze flickered between Emily and Lily. Lily noticed him watching and looked up with open curiosity. "Mom," she said softly, "is he the man from the park?" Emily nodded once. "Yes." Michael inhaled sharply, then forced himself to breathe. "Hello," he said gently, lowering his voice. "I'm Michael." Lily studied him carefully, then smiled in a small, polite way that made his chest ache. "Hi." The simplicity of the exchange felt monumental. Emily waited until Lily returned to her coloring before turning her attention fully to him. "You have questions," she said. "But before you ask them, you need to understand something." Michael nodded immediately. "Anything." "This isn't about what you deserve," Emily continued. "This is about what she needs. And she doesn't need chaos, confusion, or broken promises." "I understand," he said. "I won't push." She studied his face, searching for defensiveness, entitlement, anything familiar. What she saw instead was restraint, and beneath it, regret that didn't ask for forgiveness. "You were wrong," she said plainly. "Yes," Michael replied without hesitation. "And being wrong had consequences," she added. "I see that now," he said. "Every day." Lily interrupted them by holding up her drawing proudly. "Mom, look." Emily smiled immediately, praising her, then glanced at Michael. He smiled too, careful not to intrude, as if afraid that even his approval might overstep an invisible boundary. They talked for nearly an hour, but not about emotions or apologies. They talked about Lily's routine, her favorite foods, what scared her at night, what made her laugh uncontrollably. Emily spoke with precision, outlining Lily's world as if it were something fragile and exact, and Michael listened as though every detail were sacred. When it was time to leave, Michael stood first, stepping back instinctively to give them space. "It was nice meeting you," he said softly to Lily. She nodded, then waved, her small hand moving with innocent certainty. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper. Michael stopped beside Emily, keeping his voice low. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "I know I don't have the right to ask for more, but, may I see her again?" Emily didn't answer immediately. She looked down at Lily, then back at him. "If this continues," she said slowly, "it will be slow. It will be on my terms. And the moment I believe this hurts her, it ends." Michael nodded. "I accept that." She studied him one last time, then nodded once. "Then we'll see." As Emily walked away with Lily's hand wrapped tightly in hers, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto her shoulders. Nothing had been resolved. Nothing had been promised. And yet, something irreversible had begun. For the first time in 2 years, Emily understood that the past was no longer contained by distance alone. It was standing just behind her now, quiet, remorseful, and waiting. And whether that would lead to healing or heartbreak was something only time, and consistency, would be allowed to decide. The days that followed settled into a careful pattern, one shaped more by restraint than emotion. Michael did not call unexpectedly or appear without warning. Every visit was discussed in advance, every meeting planned around Lily's routine rather than his convenience. Emily noticed this immediately, and though she refused to relax fully, she registered the effort quietly, storing it away without comment. Their first meeting after the cafe took place at a public playground on a warm afternoon. Lily ran toward the swings with the easy confidence of a child who felt safe in familiar surroundings. Michael stayed back at first, watching her with an intensity that bordered on reverence, as if he were afraid that stepping too close might break the moment. "Do you want to push me?" Lily asked suddenly, turning toward him with an open, expectant smile. Michael glanced at Emily, instinctively seeking permission. She nodded once. He approached slowly, placing his hands on the swing chains with careful precision, pushing gently, adjusting his strength to Lily's laughter. Her joy was immediate and unfiltered, and it struck him harder than any accusation ever had. This was what he had missed. Not milestones or photographs, but moments that existed only once and were gone forever. Emily watched from a nearby bench, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She had prepared herself for disappointment, for impatience, for the subtle signs of entitlement she associated with Michael's past. Instead, she saw hesitation, humility, and an almost painful attentiveness that unsettled her far more deeply. As the weeks passed, Lily began to recognize Michael as a consistent presence rather than a stranger. She asked when he would come again. She waited for him at the park entrance without being prompted. She accepted his presence with the natural logic of a child who measured trust through repetition rather than promises. Michael adjusted his life accordingly. Meetings were rescheduled. Business trips were postponed. His assistant noticed first, then his colleagues. Questions followed, framed politely but edged with concern. Michael answered them briefly and without apology. For the first time in his career, he allowed other people to be disappointed in him. Emily learned about the changes gradually. Michael never used them as proof or leverage. She heard about them from others, from casual remarks and unexpected confirmations that told her he was rearranging his world quietly, without demanding recognition. One evening, Lily fell asleep on the couch after a long day at the park. Michael sat beside her, barely moving, afraid that even breathing too loudly might wake her. Emily watched him from the kitchen doorway, struck by how carefully he held himself, how fully present he seemed in a moment that offered him nothing in return. "She trusts easily," Emily said softly. Michael didn't look up. "I know," he replied. "That's why I won't disappear." The word stayed with her long after he left that night. Not everything was easy. There were moments when Lily cried unexpectedly when Michael stood to leave, moments when Emily's chest tightened with fear that she was allowing something fragile to form too quickly. There were nights Emily lay awake questioning her judgment, replaying the past, wondering whether people truly changed or simply learned how to behave better for longer. Michael never tried to reassure her with speeches or apologies. He showed up. He stayed within boundaries. He accepted correction without defensiveness when Emily reminded him of limits. When Lily had a nightmare and asked for her mother, Michael stepped back without argument, understanding that presence did not mean replacement. The shift came quietly, without announcement. One afternoon, Lily reached for Michael's hand as they crossed the street, her fingers curling around his without hesitation. Michael froze for half a second, then closed his hand gently around hers, his throat tightening as he realized that trust had arrived without permission or warning. Emily saw it happen and felt a sharp mix of fear and relief collide in her chest. That night, after Lily was asleep, Emily spoke the concern she could no longer ignore. "She's getting attached," she said. Michael met her gaze steadily. "I know. And if you hurt her?" "I won't," he said quietly. "Not by leaving. Not by doubting you again." Emily studied him for a long moment, searching for certainty in a place where none could truly exist. Finally, she nodded, not because her fear had vanished, but because his actions had earned something close to belief. For the first time since she had walked out that door 2 years ago without defending herself, Emily allowed herself to consider the possibility that Michael was no longer the man who had shouted accusations instead of asking questions. He was becoming someone else. And whether she was ready for it or not, Lily had already begun to sense the difference. The pressure finally arrived from the one place Michael had always believed to be unshakable. His work, the structure that had once justified every harsh word and every neglected relationship, began pushing back. At first it was subtle. Meetings were rescheduled without consulting him. Decisions he would normally make alone were suddenly discussed in committees. His absence, once tolerated because of results, started to feel inconvenient to people who had built their expectations around his constant availability. Michael noticed, but he did not rush to fix it. His priorities had shifted in ways he still struggled to articulate. He left the office on time, even when it meant disappointing clients. He turned his phone off during dinner, even when emails stacked up unanswered. He learned Lily's routine so well that he could predict when she would get tired, when she needed quiet, when a sudden mood change meant hunger rather than misbehavior. These things mattered more than numbers now, and that realization both grounded and terrified him. Emily felt the tension building long before he spoke about it. She saw it in the way his shoulders tightened when his phone buzzed, in the way his jaw clenched when he glanced at the screen and chose not to answer. She knew that eventually, the two parts of his life would collide, and she feared being the reason he would be forced to choose. The collision came one afternoon when Lily's daycare called. She had fallen while playing and scraped her knee badly enough to need stitches. It wasn't life-threatening, but she was frightened and inconsolable. Emily was stuck in the middle of an important work obligation she couldn't leave immediately. Without overthinking it, she called Michael. He arrived before she did. When Emily reached the clinic, she found him sitting in a small chair beside Lily's bed, holding her carefully while a nurse cleaned the wound. Lily's face was red from crying, but her grip on Michael's sleeve was firm, unquestioning. "I was brave," Lily said when she saw Emily, her voice trembling. "You were very brave," Emily replied, forcing a smile while her heart pounded painfully in her chest. Michael looked up at her, relief evident in his eyes. "She did great," he said quietly. That night, After Lily had fallen asleep, Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular. The image of Lily reaching for Michael replayed in her mind over and over again. "She trusts you," Emily said finally. Michael nodded. "I know. And if this falls apart," she continued, her voice barely steady, "she won't understand why." Michael didn't rush to reassure her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his expression serious in a way Emily had never seen before. "I'm not walking away," he said. "Not from her. Not from you. Even if it costs me everything else." The cost came faster than he expected. Within days, Michael was called into a closed-door meeting with senior leadership. The conversation was polite, carefully phrased, but unmistakable. His focus was questioned. His availability criticized. His commitment to the company reframed as uncertain. They offered options. Step back temporarily. Delegate more. Reconsider his priorities. Michael listened calmly, then shook his head. "This is my priority now," he said. "I won't compromise it." The silence that followed was heavy and final. When he told Emily later that evening, she felt a wave of guilt so sharp it nearly took her breath away. "You shouldn't have to lose everything," she said quietly. Michael shook his head. "I lost the wrong things before. I'm not doing that again." The tension reached Lily, as children always sensed what adults tried to hide. She became quieter for a few days, watching both of them with unusual seriousness. One evening, as Michael helped her put on her pajamas, she looked up at him suddenly. "You're not mad at Mommy, right?" she asked. Michael froze. "No," he said gently. "Why would you think that?" "Because sometimes grown-ups leave when they're mad," Lily replied softly. Michael knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes fully. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not now. Not later." Lily studied his face for a long moment, then nodded as if filing the answer away somewhere important. Emily watched from the doorway, tears burning behind her eyes. In that moment, she understood that Michael had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had made himself essential not through promises, but through presence. Later that night, when the apartment was quiet, Emily spoke the truth she had been holding back. "I'm still afraid," she admitted. "But I believe you're trying." Michael met her gaze steadily. "Trying isn't enough," he said. "I'm staying." The world outside continued to shift, to judge, to demand explanations. Inside that small apartment, however, something had settled into place. Michael was no longer a visitor in Lily's life. He was becoming someone who stayed, even when staying was the hardest choice he had ever made. The change did not arrive with celebration or certainty. It came quietly, almost unnoticed at first, settling into their days until it felt natural, inevitable. Michael no longer counted how many hours he spent away from work or measured his worth by meetings attended and deals closed. His sense of time reshaped itself around Lily's routines, her laughter, her sudden questions, and the small moments that could never be postponed without being lost forever. Lily adjusted first, as children often do when something finally feels stable. She stopped asking when Michael would come again and began assuming that he would. She waited for him by the window in the evenings, dragged her favorite books toward the couch when she saw him take off his coat, and protested loudly if he tried to leave before she fell asleep. Her trust was complete and unguarded, and Michael carried it with a reverence that bordered on fear, knowing exactly how fragile it was. Emily watched this transformation with mixed emotions that shifted daily. Some mornings she felt relief so strong it made her dizzy, as if the weight she had carried alone for years had finally been set down beside her. Other days, fear crept back in, whispering that nothing this good came without cost. She allowed herself neither denial nor blind hope. She observed, she listened, and she paid attention to what Michael did when no one was watching. He stayed. He stayed when Lily had tantrums that lasted too long and made no sense. He stayed when Emily snapped from exhaustion and immediately regretted it. He stayed when nights were sleepless and mornings arrived too quickly. There were no speeches, no dramatic apologies repeated for reassurance. There was only consistency, offered quietly and without conditions. One evening, as summer gave way to early autumn, Lily fell asleep between them on the couch, her head resting against Michael's chest, her small hand clutching Emily's shirt. The television played softly in the background, forgotten. Emily sat very still, afraid to move, afraid to break the moment. "She feels safe," Emily said quietly. Michael nodded. "So do I." The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning neither of them rushed to define. They had learned the cost of assumptions and the damage of words spoken without listening. What they were building now required patience, honesty, and the courage to stay present even when the past tried to interfere. Michael's professional life continued to change, reshaping itself around choices he no longer questioned. He took on a quieter role, stepped back from visibility, and accepted the loss of power with an unexpected sense of peace. The silence that followed the end of constant ambition did not feel empty. It felt earned. One afternoon, Lily ran ahead of them in the park, her laughter bright and unrestrained. She tripped, caught herself, and looked back at them both with a proud grin. "Did you see?" she shouted. Michael laughed, a sound that still surprised him with its ease. Emily watched him then, really watched him, and felt something inside her finally soften. "I used to think that night defined everything," she said softly as they walked. "That one accusation destroyed our lives." Michael looked at her, his expression open and steady. "It showed me who I was," he replied. "And who I never wanted to be again." They stopped near the edge of the park, Lily tugging at their hands impatiently. Emily took a breath. "I can't promise the future," she said. "I can only promise honesty." Michael nodded. "That's all I want." Lily slipped her small hands into theirs without thinking, fitting perfectly, as if she had always belonged there. They stood like that for a moment, three shadows stretching across the grass as the sun dipped lower. Sometimes the worst mistake does not end a story. Sometimes it becomes the moment everything finally slows down enough for the truth to be heard, for responsibility to be taken, and for love to be rebuilt without shouting, without fear, and without leaving. This time, no one walked away.